The janitor mom did not reply to him. She did not need to. Her silence was stronger than any argument. She turned away and picked up her cleaning cart, ready to return to her duties. But in her heart, something had changed forever. She was no longer invisible. She had reminded herself of her worth and reminded them that respect is not bought with wealth but earned with truth. As she pushed her cart slowly across the hall, the applause followed her. It was not loud and wild like in concerts, but it was steady and respectful. It was enough. She walked with her head high, the rag in her hand no longer a symbol of weakness, but of survival. She had worked hard all her life, and now, for once, the world had seen her strength. The millionaire sat back in his chair, defeated. His laughter had died. His pride was gone. He had been silenced not by another rich man, not by a rival, but by a janitor mom who carried music in her soul, and he knew he would never forget it. The millionaire sat stiffly in his chair, his face pale and tight. He had lost control of the evening, and everyone knew it. The spotlight that was once his had shifted to the janitor mom. She had played one note, then a melody, and in doing so she had silenced his arrogance. The weight of that moment hung heavy in the hall, and the guests waited to see what he would do. At last, he stood and walked slowly back toward the piano. His shoes clicked loudly on the polished floor, but there was no confidence in his stride now. He cleared his throat and picked up the bills he had tossed earlier, $10,000, crumpled and scattered across the shining surface. He gathered them in his hands and held them out awkwardly. "A deal is a deal," he said, forcing a smile that fooled no one. The janitor mom looked at the money. For years, she had dreamed of a moment like this, when a sum that large could lift her burdens. $10,000 could pay her rent for months, cover her son's school fees, even put food on the table without worry. But at that moment, she realized something. The money was not the true reward. The respect in the eyes of the crowd, the pride in her own heart, that was worth more than any bill he could hand her. Still, she stepped forward and accepted the money, not out of greed, but because she had earned it fairly. She tucked the bills carefully into her pocket, her head held high. The millionaire tried to laugh again. "Well, you got lucky, janitor," he muttered. "One note, and now you're rich." But his words were hollow. The guests around him did not join his laughter. Instead, they frowned. Some even shook their heads. They knew luck had nothing to do with it. A woman in a red dress spoke firmly. That was not luck, that was talent and courage. Others nodded in agreement. Their voices rose, filling the room with admiration for the janitor mom. The millionaire's shoulders slumped. He had been outnumbered, outshone, and outclassed, not by another rich man, but by a woman who worked in silence and humility. The janitor mom felt her cheeks warm as the guests continued to praise her. She was not used to being noticed, not used to being treated as someone important. For so long she had been invisible, cleaning in the shadows. But tonight, she had been seen, truly seen. A man in a dark suit stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Madam, you should be proud, that was extraordinary." She lowered her eyes shyly and whispered, "Thank you." Her co-workers, who had been standing quietly in the back, clapped softly, their faces glowing with pride. They had always respected her hard work, but now they admired her for something far greater. One of them whispered, "She's an inspiration." Another said, "She showed them all." Their words reached her, and she felt a tear slip down her cheek, not from sadness but from relief. For once in her life, she was recognized not for the dirt she cleaned, but for the beauty she carried inside. The millionaire tried one last time to save his pride. "Well," he said loudly, "I gave her the stage. Without me, none of this would have happened." But the guests did not cheer. Instead, one man replied sharply, "No, you tried to humiliate her. She made the moment her own." The room erupted in agreement. The millionaire's face burned red. He realized there was nothing more he could say. His power had vanished. The janitor mom did not speak. She did not need to. Her silence was stronger than any argument. She stood with quiet dignity, her head high. She had already won. The money in her pocket was heavy, but the respect in her heart was far heavier. She had shown them that value does not come from wealth, but from truth and courage. The guests began to clap again, louder and steadier. The sound echoed across the hall. She felt her chest tighten as the applause washed over her. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to smile. It was a small smile, but it was real. She had not only silenced the room, she had reminded herself of her worth. One man approached her carefully. "If you ever want to play again, I know people who could help you," he said kindly. Another guest nodded. "You shouldn't keep your gift hidden." The janitor mom's heart raced. She never imagined doors could open for her, never imagined that anyone would see her as more than a janitor, yet tonight had changed everything. The millionaire sank back into his chair, silent and defeated. He had lost not only the respect of the crowd but also his own pride. He would be remembered not for his wealth or his laughter, but for the night. A janitor mom silenced him with one note. As the applause slowly faded, the janitor mom gathered her cart again. She touched the piano gently before stepping away, whispering in her heart, "Thank you." She had almost forgotten how alive she felt when she played. Now she knew she could never let that part of herself die again. She walked slowly across the hall, the rag in her hand, the money in her pocket, and the sound of her music still echoing in her soul. For the first time in many years, she did not feel like just a janitor. She felt like herself, strong, proud, and unbreakable. For years she had buried her love for music, hiding it behind long nights of cleaning floors and carrying heavy buckets. But in that moment, the part of her she thought was lost came alive again. The guests were still whispering among themselves. Some leaned toward each other, shocked that a janitor could play with such grace. A man in a dark suit whispered, "Did you hear that depth? That wasn't a beginner's hand." Another woman with diamonds around her neck shook her head. "She plays better than half the performers I've heard." Their eyes, which once looked at her with pity or mockery, now carried something different: curiosity, respect, even admiration. The janitor mom bent down to pick up her rag again, trying to return to her work. She did not want to stay in the spotlight for long. She had never been someone who chased attention. Her whole life she had been in the background, quiet, invisible, but deep inside she felt something shifting. Her heart whispered that perhaps it was time to stop hiding. The millionaire still stood near the piano, his smirk gone. His friends avoided his eyes, none of them willing to laugh anymore. He felt the weight of what had just happened. He had wanted to humiliate her, to make her look small. Instead, she had made him look like a fool. He tried to convince himself it was nothing, just a trick of the moment. But he could not forget the sound of her playing, the emotion in every note. Meanwhile, the janitor mom's mind drifted back to her son. She imagined his face if he had been there, his bright eyes and wide smile. He always begged her to play again. "Just one song, Mom," he used to say. She would smile and shake her head, saying she was too tired. But the truth was she was afraid. Afraid of feeling that old dream again. Afraid of being reminded of what she had lost. Tonight she realized she had denied not only herself but also him the gift of her music. Her co-workers, who had been standing quietly in the back, exchanged looks of amazement. They had worked beside her for years, never knowing she carried such talent. One of them whispered, "All this time, and we never knew." Another shook her head and said, "She's more than any of us ever imagined." For the first time, the janitor mom felt like people truly saw her, not just her uniform, not just the mop in her hand, but her. The music had revealed something powerful. It wasn't only about talent, it was about survival. Every note she played carried years of struggle, of sacrifice, of nights spent working while her son slept. Those notes carried her loneliness, her resilience, her love. The audience had felt it, even if they couldn't put it into words. That was why they had gone silent, why their laughter had died, because her music had touched them in a way money never could. The millionaire finally spoke, trying to sound casual. Well, she has some skill, he muttered. Maybe luck, maybe practice, who knows. But his words sounded empty. The guests ignored him. They were no longer focused on his wealth or his jokes. Their attention had shifted completely to the woman he had mocked. The janitor mom glanced once more at the piano. Her reflection in the polished surface looked different now. She did not see just a tired worker. She saw the woman she once dreamed of being, the musician, the artist, the person who could make hearts move with her touch. That image filled her with warmth. She had almost forgotten she was still capable of being more. She picked up her rag and moved to clean a nearby table. But her hands were steady now, not shaking. Her body still ached from long hours of work, but her spirit was lighter. She felt proud that she had not walked away, proud that she had stood up to the laughter, proud that she had remembered who she was. The guests began to approach her in small groups. One man politely said, "Excuse me, miss, where did you learn to play like that?" She froze, not used to being addressed so kindly. She hesitated before replying softly, "At home when I was younger." A woman in a red dress smiled warmly and said, "You have a gift, you shouldn't hide it." The janitor mom lowered, her eyes embarrassed, but inside her heart glowed. Everywhere she looked, she saw eyes that no longer dismissed her. They saw her worth now, not because of her job or her clothes, but because of what she carried inside. That realization filled her with quiet joy. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe her life did not have to be limited to cleaning halls in the dark. Maybe there was still a place for her music in the world. The millionaire remained silent, but his face was red. He had wanted to make her a joke, but instead, she had shown everyone that true greatness comes from within. He could never undo what had happened, and he knew it. The more he tried to downplay it, the more foolish he looked. The janitor mom finished wiping the table and stood tall. The rag in her hand was still the same, but everything else felt changed. She no longer felt invisible, no longer felt powerless. Her music had broken the walls that kept her hidden, and now the whole room had seen her light. That night, as she gathered her cart and prepared to leave, she whispered to herself, "I am more than they think. I always was." And for the first time in years, she truly believed it. The janitor mom stood near her cart, her eyes lowered as the crowd around her continued to whisper. She thought the moment was over, that her brief touch of music would fade and everyone would return to their laughter. But something had changed in the room. The air felt different, heavier, filled with respect instead of mockery. The silence she had created with her playing still lingered, pressing on every person there. The millionaire shifted uncomfortably. He had been the loudest man in the room only minutes ago, laughing and boasting. Now he felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. They were no longer laughing with him, they were waiting, watching what he would do next. His throat felt dry. He forced a smile, trying to act as if he was still in control, but deep inside he knew he had lost something. The janitor mom looked up briefly and caught his eye. He expected fear, maybe shame, but instead he saw calmness. Her expression was steady, and that unsettled him more than anything. He had tried to break her, but instead she had stood taller. He realized then that money could not always buy power. Sometimes courage and talent were stronger. One of the guests cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "That was extraordinary," he said softly. His words carried across the hall, and soon others nodded in agreement. Another woman said, "She played with such heart. I've never heard anything like it." The guests who once mocked her now spoke with awe, and the millionaire felt his grip on the room slipping further away. He pulled out the thick roll of cash again, waving it as though it could erase what had just happened. "Well, I did say $10,000, he muttered, tossing the bills onto the piano. The money scattered, but no one clapped. No one laughed. The gesture looked cheap compared to the beauty they had just witnessed. The janitor mom glanced at the bills, but she did not move to collect them. Her silence spoke louder than any words. For the first time, the millionaire felt small. He had built his life on pride, on the belief that wealth made him untouchable. But standing in front of a woman in worn shoes and a faded uniform, He realized money could not shield him from truth. Her music had stripped him bare. It showed. Everyone in the room the emptiness of his arrogance. The janitor mom's co-workers stood at the back, their faces glowing with pride. They had always known her as hardworking, quiet, and humble, but now they saw her as something more. One whispered, "She's braver than any of us." Another said, "She silenced him without saying a single word." Their admiration gave her strength. She was no longer just a janitor to them. She was an example, a reminder that even in the hardest lives, greatness can survive. The guests began to applaud again, this time louder. They were not applauding the millionaire. They were applauding her. Some even stepped forward, wanting to shake her hand. She felt awkward, unused to such attention. But she nodded politely, her heart racing. She never imagined she would receive respect from people who once looked down on her. The millionaire's friends avoided his eyes. They no longer clung to his words. Instead, they whispered about the janitor mom, admiring her courage. He felt his power draining away. His laughter would no longer command the room. His money no longer made him the most interesting man there. He had been outshone by the very person he tried to mock. The janitor mom slowly walked back to the piano. Her hands brushed against the keys once more. Not to play, but to remind herself that she had done it. She had stood before them all and revealed her soul, and they could never take that away. She looked at her reflection in the polished surface, and this time she saw not just a worker, not just a mother, but an artist, a woman who had not been broken by life. Her thoughts turned again to her son. She imagined his smile if he knew what had happened. He had always believed in her, always begged her to play again. Tonight, she had kept that promise, not just for him, but for herself. She whispered softly in her heart, "I still have it, I still can." The millionaire, red-faced and desperate to reclaim control, finally spoke. "You've had your moment," he said sharply. "Don't forget who gave you the chance. Without me, no one would have noticed you." But his words sounded bitter, empty, and the crowd did not agree. A man in the front row shook his head and said firmly, "No, sir. She made this moment herself, not you." The room murmured in agreement, and the millionaire felt his pride shatter. Her heart raced faster with every second. She had not played in years, not since her younger days when music was her dream. Back then, she would sit at an old second-hand piano in her apartment and play for hours. She remembered how her son used to curl up beside her, listening with wide eyes. He once told her that when she played, it felt like the whole room was brighter. But life had forced her to abandon the music she loved. Bills needed to be paid, her son needed food, and dreams did not pay rent. Now here she was, standing in front of a crowd that expected her to fail. Her knees felt weak and her palms were sweaty. She could walk away, return to her mop and bucket, and let their laughter fade into the night. But deep inside, something stronger than fear stirred. It was pride. It was the memory of who she once was before life buried her talent under endless work and exhaustion. The millionaire leaned back against the piano, his grin wide and arrogant. "What's the matter, janitor? Afraid of one note?" he asked. His friends laughed again, but the sound was not as loud as before. Some of them were beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this woman was braver than she looked. The janitor mom looked at the millionaire, then at the piano, and, for the first time that evening, she lifted her chin. She walked around the piano bench slowly, her trembling fingers brushing the polished wood. The shine of it reflected her face back at her, tired and worn, but still alive. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. She remembered her son's words, "Mom, when you play, it feels like magic." That memory gave her strength. She could not let fear win, not this time. The crowd was silent now. No laughter, no clinking glasses, just silence, waiting. The janitor. Mom lowered herself onto the bench. Her back was straight, though her hands still shook. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. The touch was familiar, like meeting an old friend she had not seen in years. A wave of emotion ran through her. She wanted to cry, but she held it back. Instead, she breathed in and out, steadying herself. Her finger hovered over one key, just one. That was all she needed to press. One note, $10,000, and the end of their mockery. But for her, it was more than money. It was proof, to them, to her son, and to herself, that she was more than just a janitor. She closed her eyes again and pressed down softly. The sound of the note filled the hall, pure and clear. It hung in the air, echoing through the space. The millionaire's smirk faded slightly, and the guests leaned forward. Something in the way she touched the key was different. It wasn't just noise, it carried feeling. For her, even one note was music, and the silence that followed was heavy with emotion, but she didn't stop there. Something inside her broke free. Her fingers moved to the next key, then another. A simple melody flowed out, gentle at first, then stronger. The room that had been filled with laughter was now filled with her music. The janitor mom forgot about the millionaire, forgot about the crowd. She remembered only the love she once felt for music, the joy of creating sound that spoke without words. Each note told a piece of her story. The years of struggle, the nights of loneliness, the quiet strength she carried. People in the audience shifted uncomfortably, their laughter gone. They weren't expecting this. They weren't expecting her. She was not just pressing keys, she was pouring her heart into the piano. The janitor mom felt her fear slip away with every sound. Her back straightened more, her hands steadied. Her music filled the hall like a voice long silenced, now shouting to be heard. She no longer cared about their judgment. She was not playing for them. She was playing for herself, for her son, for the little girl she once was who dreamed of shining on a stage. When she finally stopped, the last note lingered in the air. It floated like a whisper, soft and powerful. The room was frozen. No one spoke. No one laughed. The millionaire's smirk was gone. His face was pale. His friends stared at her with wide eyes. The silence in the hall was louder than their earlier laughter. The janitor mom sat still, her hands resting gently on the keys. Her chest rose and fell as she tried to catch her breath. She was trembling, but not from fear anymore. It was relief. It was power. For once in her life, she had stood tall and shown the world who she really was. And though she had only meant to play one note, she had given them so much more. She had given them truth. The hall was frozen in silence. The last note still seemed to float in the air, and no one dared to break it. The janitor mom sat on the piano bench, her hands resting gently on the keys. Her heart was pounding, but her face was calm. For a moment she forgot about the crowd, forgot about the millionaire. It was just her and the piano, as if time itself had stopped. The guests who had laughed earlier now shifted uneasily. Their eyes were wide, their voices hushed. They had expected her to stumble, to press a clumsy note and embarrass herself. Instead, she had played with a touch so graceful, so full of feeling, that they felt something stir inside them. It was not just sound, it was emotion, and it silenced their arrogance. The millionaire stood with his arms crossed, his grin gone. His eyes were fixed on her. But for the first time, he looked unsure. He had thought it would be an easy game, a cruel joke that would make him look powerful in front of his friends. But now he realized the joke had turned on him. He tried to laugh again, to brush it off, but the sound caught in his throat. It felt hollow, and no one joined him. The janitor mom slowly lifted her hands from the keys. She sat up straight, her eyes lowered, but there was a quiet pride in her posture. She had not come here to entertain them. She had played because she could not let her dignity be crushed. She had played because music was still alive inside her, and no amount of struggle had killed it. One of the women in the crowd leaned forward, her jeweled hand pressed against her lips. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to the man beside her. She played beautifully. The man only nodded, his mocking smile gone. Around the room, the whispers grew, soft but amazed. They could not believe the janitor had hidden such talent behind her uniform and cleaning cart. The millionaire cleared his throat loudly, trying to take back control of the moment. "It was just a note," he said, forcing a smirk onto his face. "That's all I asked for." But even as he spoke, his voice lacked confidence. Everyone in the room knew they had heard more than just a note. They had heard something real, something that came from her soul. The janitor mom finally stood. Her legs felt heavy, but her heart was lighter than it had been in years. She looked at the millionaire, and for the first time she did not feel small under his gaze. She felt equal, maybe even stronger. He could laugh, he could wave his money, but she had silenced a room full of wealthy people with nothing but her touch. Her eyes swept over the audience, and she saw something change in their faces. There was no more laughter, no more cruel smiles. Some looked embarrassed, others thoughtful. A few even looked ashamed, as if they realized how quickly they had judged her. She was no longer invisible. Her presence was undeniable. The millionaire forced a laugh and clapped his hands together. "Well," he said, "a deal is a deal." He pulled out the money and tossed it onto the piano as if trying to remind everyone that he still held the power. The bills scattered across the polished surface, but the gesture felt cheap. His wealth could not buy back the respect he had lost. The janitor mom did not rush to pick up the money. She let it sit there, her eyes never leaving the piano. For her, the true reward was not in the bills, but in the silence that still lingered. In that silence, she had spoken louder than she ever had in her life. The guests began to clap, softly at first, then louder. A ripple of applause filled the hall. It was not the kind of applause given to a performer on stage. It was different. It was respect. It was an apology, unspoken but powerful. The janitor mom's chest tightened. She had never expected this, never imagined she would stand in front of such people and hear their hands come together for her. The millionaire tried to join in, but his clapping felt forced. He could not hide his discomfort. He had wanted to humiliate her, but now he was the one exposed. His friends avoided his eyes, no longer laughing at his side. The power he had enjoyed for so long had slipped away in just a few moments of music. The janitor mom stepped down from the stage, her steps steady and calm. The crowd parted as she passed, some even bowing their heads slightly. She returned to her cleaning cart, but everything felt different now. She was no longer the invisible worker in the corner. She was the woman who had silenced the laughter, who had reminded them that true worth is not measured by money or titles. In her heart, she thought of her son. She wished he could have seen. It wished he could have heard the way she played. He always believed in her, and now the world had seen what he already knew. She smiled softly to herself. It was not just about the $10,000. It was about the pride she could finally carry. The millionaire stood stiffly, still trying to recover his pride, but deep down he knew the truth. He had been defeated not by wealth, not by power, but by a janitor mom with music in her soul, and that truth would stay with him far longer than any laugh. The janitor mom stood near her cart, her hands still trembling from the performance. She had not planned to play, not planned to face the stares of so many wealthy strangers. Yet when her fingers touched the keys, it felt like coming home. The concert hall was huge and bright, filled with golden lights that sparkled on polished marble floors. But when the last guest left and the laughter faded, silence returned. And in that silence, a woman pushed her cleaning cart slowly across the floor. She was a janitor, but also a mother, and every step she took carried the weight of her struggles. Her name was not on any list of honored guests. No one came to hear her, but she was there every night, sweeping, dusting, scrubbing, and making the place shine for others. Her clothes were simple, her shoes were worn, and her hands were rough from years of work. People saw her as invisible, just another worker in the shadows. Yet behind her tired eyes lived a story no one knew. She had once dreamed of music, dreamed of playing the piano on a stage, but life had turned in a different way. Bills, responsibilities, and the heavy burden of raising her child alone had buried her dreams. She never spoke of it, not even to her co-workers. For them, she was just the quiet woman who worked hard and never complained. Every night she cleaned around the grand piano, that beautiful black instrument that shone under the lights. She often paused for a moment when no one was watching. Her fingers would hover above the keys, remembering the feeling of music. She never dared to press a note, afraid someone might hear and laugh. Yet in her heart, Melodies lived like old friends. Waiting to be released, her child, a young boy, was the reason she kept going. He was the only light in her difficult life. Every dollar she earned went to food, clothes, and school fees. She never bought anything for herself, never allowed herself to rest. Her son sometimes asked her why she never played the piano anymore. He had once seen her touch the keys in their small apartment, and even as a child, he felt there was something special in her hands. But she only smiled and said, "One day," though inside she feared that day would never come. The world around her was harsh. People of wealth walked past her without seeing her. Guests in fine clothes often left their trash on the floor for her to pick up. Some even looked down on her, as if her work made her less of a person. She bore it silently. Because she had no choice, she could not risk losing her job. She reminded herself that every mop stroke, every polished corner, was for her child's future. She endured humiliation so he would not have to. Yet deep inside, she carried a quiet pride. She knew she had talent. She knew her hands, though scarred from chemicals and cleaning, could still bring beauty to the world. She often imagined standing on that stage, the spotlight on her, the crowd silent, listening to her play. But reality always pulled her back. Reality told her she was only a janitor, invisible, replaceable, unimportant. And so she kept her music hidden, like a secret locked away in her heart. One evening, as she polished the floor near the stage, she could hear music from the hall above. Wealthy guests had gathered for a private event. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses floated down. She paused for a moment, listening, and her heart ached. Those people had everything: money, comfort, freedom. Yet she wondered if they truly understood what music meant. To her, it was not just sound, it was life. It was the one part of herself that had never been broken. She bent down to pick up a champagne glass someone had carelessly dropped. The glass was worth more than her daily pay, but to the guests it was nothing. She sighed softly and placed it on her cart, then went back to cleaning. Her body was tired, but her spirit, though bruised, still held a quiet strength. That night, something in the air felt different. She could not explain it, but she felt as though her life was standing on the edge of change. A test was coming, and though she did not know it, the world would soon see the power she carried inside. The janitor mom kept moving, the sound of her mop echoing through the empty space. Outside, the city glittered with lights, but she was hidden away in shadows. Yet sometimes, those who live in shadows hold the brightest fire. And all it takes is one moment, one choice, one note to reveal it. The night of the big event arrived. The concert hall glittered like a palace. Guests in expensive clothes filled the room, their laughter bouncing off the high ceilings. Music played softly in the background while waiters moved around with trays of drinks in the corner, unnoticed as always. The janitor mom pushed her cleaning cart slowly. Her head was bowed, and she hoped no one would notice her presence. She wanted to finish her shift quietly and return home to her son. Among the crowd stood a millionaire, a man known not only for his wealth but also for his arrogance. He loved to show off, to make jokes at the expense of others, and to remind everyone around him of how powerful he was. That evening he was surrounded by his friends, men and women dressed in silk and diamonds. They laughed loudly at his stories, clapping him on the back as though he were the king of the night. His eyes wandered across the hall until they fell on the janitor mom. Quietly wiping down a row of chairs near the stage, the millionaire smirked. He enjoyed humiliating people he thought were beneath him. With a loud voice so the entire room could hear, he called out, "Hey, you there, the cleaner!" Everyone turned their heads to look at her. The janitor mom froze, her heart racing. She didn't want attention, especially not from a man like him. She kept her eyes on her rag, hoping he would lose interest, but the millionaire wasn't done. He stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking on the marble, and pointed to the grand piano sitting at the center of the stage. "Do you know what this is?" he asked mockingly. His friends laughed at the question. The janitor mom looked at the piano, the instrument she had admired from afar so many times. She nodded faintly. "Yes, sir," she whispered. Her soft voice was nearly lost in the noisy hall. The millionaire laughed. "Of course you do, everyone knows, but tell me, can you play even one note on it, just one? Or is that too much for a janitor?" His friends burst into laughter, their voices sharp like knives. The woman felt her cheeks burn. She wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. The millionaire wasn't finished with his game. He pulled a roll of bills from his pocket and waved it in the air. "Tell you what," he announced to the crowd. "Play one note on that piano, just one, and I'll give you $10,000. Gasps spread through the room. The number was shocking. $10,000 for a single note. The guests laughed louder, thinking it was just a joke. Some whispered that the janitor would never dare. Others smirked, waiting to see her humiliate herself. The janitor mom's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to turn and walk away, to hide in the shadows where she always belonged. But her eyes fell on the piano again, and memories stirred deep inside her. She remembered the nights long ago when she used to play, when music filled her small apartment, when her little boy danced to her melodies. She had buried that part of herself for years, but now in this cruel moment it was calling her back. The crowd continued to laugh, some even mocking her shoes, her uniform, her silence. "She won't do it," one man said. "She's too scared." A woman in jewels giggled. "She probably doesn't even know where to sit." Their voices grew louder, echoing in her mind. The millionaire leaned against the piano, waiting with a smug grin. "Come on, janitor," he teased. "Don't be shy. $10,000? For one note. Surely even you can do that." She stood frozen, gripping her rag so tightly her knuckles turned white. $10,000 could change everything. It could pay her rent for months, cover her son's school fees, and even put food on the table without fear. But more than money, it was her dignity at stake. If she walked away, she would forever regret not trying. If she accepted and failed, the laughter would haunt her forever. Her breathing quickened, her mind spinning with fear and hope. The hall grew tense as everyone waited. The laughter softened into whispers. The guests wanted to see what she would do. The janitor mom looked around, meeting the curious, mocking eyes of strangers. Then she looked back at the piano. The instrument seemed to call her, its polished surface reflecting the lights. Her heart whispered that this was her moment, maybe her only chance to show the world she was more than what they thought. With slow steps, she began to move toward the stage. The room grew quiet, the sound of her worn shoes on the marble floor echoing loudly. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she kept going. Her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed fixed on the piano. The millionaire's smirk wavered just a little, perhaps surprised she had actually accepted his dare. The janitor mom climbed the small steps to the stage. Her shadow stretched under the bright lights. She stood before the grand piano, her heart racing so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The entire room held its breath, waiting to see what she would do. In that moment, the woman who had been invisible all her life was standing in the center, and though she didn't know it yet, she was about to silence them all. "Do you want me to continue with part 3 in 800 words, same simple and emotional style?" She stood in front of the grand piano, her hands shaking, her throat dry. The bright lights above the stage made her feel exposed, and the silence of the crowd pressed against her chest like a heavy weight. All eyes were on her. Some looked at her with mockery, waiting for her to make a fool of herself. Others were curious, whispering to each other, wondering if she would even dare to touch the keys.